Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be tackling a real humdinger of a concept,
Huh.
Plato's tripartite soul.
Plato. Always a good time.
Right. So we're going to be spelunking into Book 4 of the Republic,
Oh,
specifically,
okay.
to explore this theory. And I think what's really neat about this is we're going to see how understanding how a just city works
Hmm.
can give us clues about how our own minds work.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's this really clever analogy that Plato uses to illuminate the complexities of the soul. He's basically saying that just a well-functioning city has these different classes. You've got your rulers, your warriors, your merchants.
Right.
They each have their own specific roles to play, right? And the soul, in the same way, has different parts
Okay.
that all need to work together in harmony.
So are you saying that if, like, in a city, if these classes start, like, meddling in each other's affairs, you have chaos? Is that what happens to our souls when the different parts aren't getting along?
Yeah, absolutely. Plato's argument is that when these three parts of the soul are in conflict, it leads to a type of inner turmoil, a kind of injustice within ourselves.
This is fascinating.
Yeah.
But, okay, what are these three parts? And how did Plato even figure out there were three parts of the soul? We can't exactly dissect the soul.
That's true. You can't put it under a microscope.
Right.
But Plato starts by asking this very mind-bending question.
Okay.
Can something be in two completely opposite states at the same time?
Now that you mention it, I do remember there were some pretty interesting examples in the Republic.
Yeah, like what?
He talks about a spinning top and how it appears to be both at rest and in motion simultaneously.
Right, exactly. And then there's the archer.
Oh, yeah, the archer whose hands are
Yeah.
both pushing and pulling the bow at the same time.
Exactly. Those are just simple examples, but they lead to a really profound point, and that is that to account for these contradictions, like how can something be both at rest and in motion? Our soul must have these different parts, right?
Okay.
Each one capable of having like opposing desires or taking opposite actions.
I'm starting to see where you're going with this. It's like when I'm like, I don't know, staring at a big piece of cake and I'm like, oh, that looks so good.
Yeah.
But then there's this other part of me that's, don't eat that. It's like I'm having an argument in my own head.
That is a perfect illustration. You're totally getting it. So this brings us to Plato's identification of those three parts.
Okay.
So, first up, we've got the rational element.
Mm.
This is the thinking, reasoning part of us that seeks truth and wisdom.
So like the part of me that's always trying to figure things out and
Right.
make wise choices.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
But what about like feelings?
Mm.
Like when we get angry or excited about something, what about those?
That's where the spirited element comes in.
Yeah.
This is the part of us that gives us willpower, the part driven by emotions like courage, a desire for honor, even anger.
So this is what gives us that oomph to do what we think is right.
Yeah, it's like our inner drive, our motivation.
Okay, this is starting to make sense now. So we've got reason and spirit. What's the third one?
So the third part is the appetitive element. This is the part of us that's concerned with our basic desires, our urges, things like hunger and thirst and physical pleasure.
Oh, so that's the part that's telling me to eat the cake.
Precisely. And it's important to say that the appetitive element isn't necessarily bad. It's actually really important for survival and enjoying life.
Right, of course.
But as Plato points out, the problems start when this part takes over.
So it's like in a city. If the merchants who are just concerned with profit took control, that wouldn't be a good thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It would throw everything out of whack.
So how do we make sure that doesn't happen in our souls?
This is where it gets really interesting. Plato believed that just like a city needs wise rulers to keep things in order, right?
Right.
Our rational element needs to be the one in charge.
Yep.
But to really understand how this struggle between the parts plays out, Plato tells us this fascinating story about a man named Leontius.
Yeah, so this story, it really paints this vivid picture, this inner battle we all have between our rational side and our raw desires.
Okay.
So Leontius is walking along outside the city walls, and he comes across this really gruesome sight. Dead bodies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, naturally, a part of him is drawn to it. Maybe it's morbid curiosity.
Like that feeling we all have where you shouldn't look.
Exactly.
But you want to anyway.
Yeah, you can't help yourself. But at the same time, another part of him is totally repulsed and wants to look away.
So what happens? Does he give in? He does, but not without a fight.
Okay.
Plato describes him covering his eyes and even scolding himself.
Whoa.
Yeah, like, why am I even looking at this?
Wow.
But ultimately, that desire to look, it wins out.
So he looks.
He looks, and what's so interesting is what happens afterward. His reaction, he gets angry.
At the bodies.
No, at himself for giving in to that urge.
I get that. It's like when you eat a cookie when you're trying to be healthy.
Yeah.
And then you're just mad at yourself afterward
Exactly.
for not having more willpower.
But in Leontius' case, that anger, it's directed outward. Like Plato says, he starts yelling at his own eyes.
He yells at his eyes.
Yeah.
As if they betrayed him,
Wow. That's intense. It is, but it's so revealing because what that shows us is that the spirited element, right, the one associated with courage and honor, that's aligned with reason. And it's actually like condemning the actions of the appetitor element, that desire to see something gruesome.
These parts are at war.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Leontius is just torn up inside her. He's experiencing this conflict between what he knows is right and what he ends up doing.
I think that's something we can all relate to, though. We've all had those moments where we're like, I know I shouldn't, but we do it anyway.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's part of being human, right? That inner struggle.
Okay, if we are constantly battling with these urges, how do we make sure our rational side wins?
Does Plato give us any advice on that?
Exactly.
He does. He does. He believed that achieving this inner harmony, what he called justice, it all comes down to balance.
Okay.
It's not about getting rid of our desires or emotions altogether. It's more about making sure they're in line with what our rational mind knows is best.
So it's not about never being angry or never enjoying anything, but about making sure those impulses are like guided by reason.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so maybe justice isn't so much about rules, but more about a state of being,
That's a great way to put it.
like where all the parts of ourselves are working together.
Yes, exactly. A just soul, for Plato, it's one where every part is thriving and doing what it's meant to do. And to make this even clearer, he brings up this analogy of a chariot.
Okay.
He says, imagine a chariot with 3 horses. So the rational element, that's the charioteer.
Okay.
And their job is to guide those horses. And the horses, they represent the spirited and the appetitive elements.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
So if the charioteer is skilled, if they know what they're doing, the horses are going to work together and pull the chariot towards its destination.
But if the charioteer loses control, the horses could go off in all different directions.
Exactly. And then you've got a crash.
Oof.
And that's what happens to us, to our lives. When we let our desires and our emotions run wild without any guidance from reason, it's chaos.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
So how do we become these amazing charioteers? Does Plato think we're just born with this ability, or can we learn it?
Plato was a huge believer in education. He thought that just as we train our bodies to be strong, we need to train our minds to be wise, to be virtuous.
Learning how to think critically.
Yes. And to examine our own motives and to make choices that are good for us in the long run.
It sounds like Plato's saying that justice, this state of inner harmony, it's not something we just stumble into. It's something we have to work for.
Exactly. It takes effort. But it's not just about individual effort. Plato also talks about the importance of our environment.
Okay.
He believed that a just society, like a society that's set up to promote virtue and wisdom, that plays a huge role in helping people develop just souls.
So like the media we consume, the people we hang out with, the stories we tell ourselves, all of that matters.
Yeah, all of it. All those things shape us. They shape the inner workings of our souls.
So we should be asking ourselves, are these things helping me cultivate that inner harmony, or are they pulling me away from it?
Exactly. That's the question. And that brings us to another really interesting part of Plato's theory. The idea that each part of the soul actually has its own unique function and its own excellence.
Okay, so each part has a job to do to
Yeah.
make sure everything is working smoothly.
Exactly. Just like in that city, right? The different groups contribute to the city as a whole. Each part of the soul has a special contribution to a good life.
Okay.
Let's start with that rational element. What makes it excellent, what makes it the best it can be, according to Plato, is wisdom.
Wisdom.
Yeah. That's the part of us that seeks knowledge,
Okay.
tries to understand the world, and uses reason and logic to make good judgments.
The part of me that's always asking questions.
Yes, exactly. Always curious, always trying to learn, and trying to see the bigger picture.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about courage? Where does that fit in?
Oh, courage. That is the excellence of the spirited element.
Okay.
It's like the fire in our belly, the thing that pushes us to face our fears, to stand up for what we believe in.
Even when it's hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's our inner strength and our determination.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm still curious about this appetitive element. We've talked about how it can get us into trouble.
Yeah.
Does Plato think there's anything good about it?
He does. He does. Even the appetitive element, the part that's all about our desires, it has its own type of excellence too.
Okay.
And that is moderation.
Moderation, really. But isn't the appetitive element all about indulging in those desires?
Yeah, but it's not about denying ourselves completely. It's about finding a balance, enjoying those pleasures, but not letting them take over.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Having a piece of cake, but not the whole cake.
Exactly. Or going out with friends, having a good time, but not going overboard.
It's about enjoying things, but not letting them control us.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Finding that sweet spot.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah. And when each part of the soul is doing its job and aiming for its own excellence, wisdom for the rational part, courage for the spirited part, and moderation for the appetitive part, that's when we achieve that harmony, that balance that Plato calls justice.
This reminds me of, I don't know, a dance performance or something,
Yeah.
where each dancer has their own moves, but it all comes together to create something beautiful.
Oh, I love that. That's a great way to put it. It's this beautiful collaboration. And it brings us back to that city analogy, right? When the rulers are wise and the warriors are brave and the merchants are pursuing wealth, but in a balanced way, then the whole city thrives. And it's the same with our souls. When our rational element leads with wisdom, and our spirited element acts with courage, and our appetitive element is guided by moderation, that creates the conditions for us to flourish, to have a life filled with purpose and peace.
This has been so interesting. It's really given me a new way to think about like all the different parts of myself and how they work together and how important it is to work on those different parts.
Yeah, I think Plato is really offering us a roadmap to a better life. And these ideas, they're still relevant today, even though he wrote them thousands of years ago.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing how much his work still resonates. So to everyone listening, thank you for coming along with us on this deep dive into Plato's tripartite soul. We've learned a lot today. And maybe this gives you some new ideas to think about and maybe some new ways to work on yourself. Until next time, keep on learning and keep on growing.